Welcome to the Know Why podcast. Today we're going to be asking the question, do all religions point to the same truth? And the reason we're talking about this is because there was an interview in the New York Times that went kind of viral with Ezra Klein and James Talarico. Talarico is running for Senate in Texas, and he's kind of making waves as a very Christian Democrat. He is very open about his Christian faith. And so a lot of people are talking about the way that he articulates the Christian faith. And we don't want to dunk on him. I'm not out to criticize him. I think he actually says a lot of nice things, but he also makes some interesting claims about Christianity. So what we want to do is examine those claims because they are common questions that a lot of people ask. And so here to kind of navigate all of that with me is John Noyes. He is a returning guest to the Know Why podcast. John, it's great to have you on again.
It's so good to be here. Thanks for having me again, Liberty.
Yes. So just as a reminder, or for any new listeners, John is an apologist with Stand to Reason. He's actually a former atheist and used to think that belief in God was irresponsible. And then he examined the evidence for Christianity and became a Christian. And so he also has a history in the legal field. He is a pastor, has a master's degree in Christian apologetics. And so, again, such a great perspective. I'm so glad that you're here, John. But as I said, I don't really want to pick apart James Talarico particularly too much, personally. But he does say a lot of things, I think, that warrant examining. And so he comes across with this very, I think, attractive version of Christianity, something that a lot of people maybe haven't heard articulated, or they have a stereotype in their minds of what Christians believe. And then he's articulating something that's a little different. And so that interests people. So let's start with something that he attributes to his pastor that he had growing up in a Presbyterian church. And this was the idea that religion shouldn't lead to itself. Religion should lead you deeper into your own life. So that's a quote from Mr. Talarico. And so that really brings us to the question, what is religion? Like, what's the point of it? Is it an end in and of itself, or is it supposed to, like he said, draw you deeper into your own self, or is it something different?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. I wish that I actually don't know the conversation you're talking about. So his name is Talarico. I'm so sorry. I'm so disconnected with social media.
You know what? That's probably a good thing. It's okay.
Yeah. Well, especially these days, like I'm just so busy. But I mean, that saying that he said. So I just want to see you understand this right. So he said that religion isn't supposed to be an end in of itself. It's supposed to be pointing you more inward towards yourself.
Lead you deeper into your own life.
Yeah, I think I would love to ask him what he means by that. Because just as a naturalist, when I was a naturalist, naturalism at its core, all you have is yourself. That's it. And so everything is through human striving. Right? Your successes and your failures, you're the master of your own ship. And I just know from my personal experience, you can chalk it up to just being anecdotal maybe, but I know it leads to some very dark places really quickly. I would actually argue that it's based on the assumption, this gentleman is basing his hidden assumption that all we need is more of ourselves, where I don't think we need more of ourselves. I think we need less of ourselves because it's ourselves who mess it up. Religion every religion is supposed to give us an accurate view of reality. It's a description of the way the world really is. Now it's up to us to take that description and overlay it onto reality and see which religion best fits reality. But it's not about merely self-improvement or even like getting into heaven or the things that we think are good things, it's actually a pursuit of the way the world really is. And I think that's the ultimate ethic. The thing that we should all be doing is pursuing questions of origin, meaning, purpose, morality, destiny, the big, what I call the holy cow questions, according to truth. And when that guides us, I think it kind of reframes everything. This isn't about human experience or feelings. If I lived according to the way that made me feel good, this would not be a good place for anybody. If I'm honest. I don't know. I hope that answers your question, Liberty.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. And I think it's helpful to, because it's actually something he said a few times. And I think it reminds me of what a lot of people who aren't very acquainted with Christianity or any sincere religion very well is that you hear the trope like religions are responsible for all the world's wars in the world. Like, religion is the bad guy, basically. And they're kind of classifying all of those together. And he keeps saying, well, religion isn't the end in and of itself. Like, and I almost wonder if he's meaning it's not about the ritual or the symbols or just the motions. Maybe he's trying to articulate that there's a deeper meaning there. But again, it's like, well, is it the self or is it some outside objective truth like you were saying?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, there's, with every pursuit, we should be looking to align things up with objective truth, and actually I think the worldview, now that you're talking about this, now this man's coming to my mind. Actually, I think I've seen some clips, believe it or not.
He was on Joe Rogan.
Yes.
So he's gotten a lot of attention for really articulating something that seems sincere to me when I see him talk, but is a very different version of Christianity than a lot of people have heard.
Yeah, and not to derail your interview, but like I think he was arguing on Joe Rogan that Christianity is a pro-choice
Yes.
religion,
Yeah.
and he bases it on the what he claims to be the Jewish understanding, that life starts at first breath because God breathed life into Adam. And that's somehow the model of, okay, it's only when we have first breath, I think it kind of shows his cards. And like you said, I'm not trying to dunk on anybody. That's not my nature, honestly. But that's just a misunderstanding of one, what the scriptures teach. The scriptures say that God knit us together in our mother's womb, right? The scriptures are clear that life is there before first breath. For example, when if you remember the account where so Mary is pregnant with Jesus, and the first thing she does is she goes to see Elizabeth, right? And Elizabeth is pregnant with John, and you remember that first interaction? Like it says that John leapt in his mother's womb, and so there you have like a zygote Jesus and a second trimester John, clearly interacting with each
Right.
other. I mean, the Bible is so clear that life starts at conception. So is science, by the way.
Right.
I mean, so not only is he misunderstanding the Christian worldview, but he's also misunderstanding and misrepresenting embryology and biology. But anyways, I think that's a separate issue than what you're talking about. But now I remember who this gentleman is.
Well, yeah, and it all connects, really. So let's actually, I'm going to ask this question now because I think it's a good starting point. And so, really, when anybody is advocating a certain belief system, they're really telling a story about the world. Because, like you said, what's reality, right? Because we all experiencing the world here. So is it a simulation? Are we just here by accident? What is it by design? Like there's some story of the world. And even if you say you don't know, everybody operates according to an assumption. So I think what we need to do is say, well, there is a real story, and if you are living according to that story and you are living in that story, that's going to have implications for every area
Right.
of life. And so you have to start at the beginning, though, of the story. Like if you just start in the middle of the story, you're going to confuse people. So would you agree with that or have anything else to add? Like when it comes to Christianity, we really have to kind of go back to creation.
Yeah, I think if you want to understand I love the motif of story, right? Because stories move us. It's something that we can relate to. If I were to hand you a book, I have a book right here. It's called Faithful. It's about the Boston Red Sox when they won the World Series for the first time in 86 years. If you just opened that book up to the middle and just started reading, you'd gain some understanding of what's happening for sure. But you wouldn't gain you don't get the drama. You don't get the buildup, and you don't get the actual. I would say if you lack that, the beginning initial part, you're missing the main theme of the of the story. This is that an amazing thing is going to happen that the fans have been waiting for so long. And it's the same with the biblical narrative, right? Both of these are true stories. They accurately depict the way the world is, and that's our goal. Our goal is to figure out which story of reality is true, and one of the ways that we come to a better understanding of the true story of reality, or understanding that story, is to start where it begins. And again, going to this gentleman's statements where he I think he thinks that all religions kind of are equally true, or to a certain extent. Not all religions stat in the same place. So if they don't stat in the same place, certainly they don't end in the same place.
Yeah.
So if they don't stat in the same place and they don't end in the same place, then they might have a few threads throughout it that might be similar. Like, for example, the idea, the golden rule, right? That you should treat others as you want yourself to be treated, right? Jesus says this. This is in the Quran. This is in Confucianism. This is, Zoroastrianism. Like, all of these stories share that thread. But I don't think the significance is found in the similarities. I think the significance is found in the differences. And then we nowhere more do we see this than in the person and the work of Jesus Christ, right? So just take the major monotheistic religions today. We've got Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. And then take the most influential person who's ever walked the planet, Jesus. Now, Jesus is in each story. He's a main character in each story, right? To varying degrees. On Islam, Jesus is a wise sage, a prophet, one of the greatest prophets, right? But on Islam, Jesus didn't die on a cross, and that means he wasn't raised again from the dead. That would be blasphemous. On Judaism, Jesus was a false prophet, a blasphemer, worthy of death on a Roman cross, and he was hung on that cross and he died. But Judaism doesn't have him raised again, certainly not. Christianity says that Jesus is the God-man, the second person of the Trinity, come down in flesh to take on the sins of the world, who lived a perfect and sinless life, who died on a Roman cross and then was raised 3 days later. You see, all three of those things can't be true at the same time. They could all be false. But they can't all be true. So I think the person who says that all religions kind of lead you into the same type of truth, I don't think they're taking the worldview of every major religion seriously. I think that they're making caricatures. They have to in order to get there.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things that, you keep mentioning truth. Like, okay, they can't all be true. They all have conflicting claims. And he says, this is another quote, Buddhism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, these beautiful faith traditions are circling the same truth about the universe, about the cosmos, and that truth is inherently a mystery. And he, we've been talking about story, and he used the kind of analogy of language, like each religion is kind of a different language talking about the same mysterious truth, which again, it's like, oh, that's nice. Like that's pretty. But is the truth a mystery?
Yeah, no. Again, it's funny. Like, I would want to ask him, like, what, because that statement, it sounds nice, but what does it mean? Is his statement, can I apply the same principle that he's carrying into his statement to his words? James, you're using all of these wonderful words, but there's just entangled in them is just mystery. So what is it that you're really saying? And this is why I think the truth is important, right? It's so important when we start talking about worldviews, especially. We can know what is true about God, right? And and this isn't just the Christian. The Christian, among other religions, they think, for example, like, just go back to Jesus. We say that Jesus is God, right? And that's not it's not a relative statement. It's not subjective. I'm not saying I think Jesus is God. I'm saying Jesus actually is God, right? It's objective in nature, meaning we can know this with a fair amount of certainty. If he wasn't God, I wouldn't believe that he was. So again, I think that what he does is he's not taking the views seriously, and he's instead punting to mystery that somehow we can't know these things. Of course we can, and maybe without knowing it. Now that I'm talking this through with you, Liberty. So have you read Francis Schaeffer ever?
Yes.
Or
It's been a
Nancy
long time, but I'm
Pearcey?
familiar with his work. Yeah.
So Schaeffer and then Piercy after him. Nancy Pearcey's kind of the
I'm reading
disciple.
Total Truth right now, by the way.
Oh my gosh, it's so
So
good,
good.
right? I was just going to
Yes.
mention that book. So in
Yes.
Total Truth, that Nancy Pearcey describes, and this is ultimately a Schaeffer thing, that the world has taken truth and they've bifurcated, they've split it into two stories. They have the upper story and the lower story of truth.
Yeah.
One is objective in nature, and that's where we put things like science and mathematics, right? And then the other is subjective, and that's where we place things like morality and religion. And the culture has come to understand these things in these terms without really knowing. And I think this is true of this gentleman, where subjective means it's true of the subject itself. It's a matter of personal opinion, personal preference. It's like the famous illustration is ice cream flavor, right? It's a matter of like what you like or don't like. I love mint chocolate chip ice cream. Mint chocolate chip ice cream is the best flavor of ice cream. It doesn't make any sense for you, Liberty, to tell me I'm wrong about that
Right.
because it's my personal preference.
Right.
But when I say that Jesus is God, it's a totally different type of statement. It's the same type of statement as me saying 2 + 2 = 5. I'm claiming it's not 6, it's not 3, it's not even 4, which is the right answer, of course, right? I'm saying it's 2 + 2 = 5 and the reason why I say 5 is because objective claims can be false. So they can be true or false. And this is what we've done. Like when we start talking about morality, it's the same thing. We've put these in subconsciously. It's what we've been taught. We come to the table assuming that when people make moral claims or religious claims, they're subjective, they're ice cream claims, and they're not. They're objective claims about the nature of reality. It goes back to what you said before. There's an objective nature to reality. And yes, there's some mystery. I'm not going to deny the mystery. I love the mystery. But there's also a lot of stuff that I think is pretty, I mean, we can explain it. The reliability, the historical reliability of the Gospels. I think that we can come to the understanding that the Gospels are pretty reliable when it comes to historical standards. And we don't do that just by praying over it or believing really hard. We actually apply, complex scientific rigor to the documents themselves, right? So things like textual criticism and historiography, and we look at the nature of the texts, and we can, just like we do anything else, whether it's reading about Alexander the Great or Shakespeare, we apply the same historical methods, and we find out, wait a second, this text is reliable, and if it's reliable, I think we should do well to believe it. And if we believe it, that means Jesus is who he says he is. And that means, by the way, that means the statement, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me, is objectively true. And that means all of the other systems are by definition false. And I think that's where, is it Talarico, Mr. Talarico?
Talarico. Yeah.
Talarico, Mr. Talarico. And that's where I think he's making a misstep here. And I ultimately, I'd say he doesn't take the claims of religion seriously. I mean, some religions claim, some religions claim that you can be, when you die, you're reincarnated. Some claim that you go to nothing because there is nothing. Some claim that you go to heaven or hell. But when you die, you can't go to all three. You know what I mean? And that's actually where his views get dangerous, because he's leading people into false beliefs, and a false understanding of how to come to these beliefs, I think.
So the thing is, he's not alone. Like, again, I keep referring to him because he had a couple big popular interviews. So he's been kind of serving up these questions for us to consider, like, okay, but actually a lot of people kind of believe that. So just recently, the Cultural Research Center, which is led by George Barna, put out a survey revealing that 92% of American adults' philosophy is syncretism, which is
Yeah.
just a hodgepodge of contradictory philosophies, including churchgoers. So
Yeah.
the majority of people who claim to be Christians actually hold views that logically oppose each other. Like, you have to be a good person, like good works have to outweigh the bad works, or I don't know, just like lots of things that kind of come from different religions and philosophies. So why, and these are people that, again, claim to be Christians, go to church on a regular basis. They would, they say, yeah, I'm a Christian. Why? And that's something Talarico even said too, is like, he cites Matthew 25. We're going to be judged by our actions, not prayers and going to church and stuff. So it's like, why do people have such opposing views at the same time and like often not even realize it?
Well, I mean, on a base level, I think it's because people aren't taking time to understand what it is that they believe and why. I think, as far as a Christian perspective, I think, oh man, this is like so hard to say. I think that, listen, I love the church, and I have a real heart for pastors. I'm a pastor. I pastor a small little teeny tiny church of amazing people. We get excited when we have 100 people show up at my church. Yeah, right in the middle of like here in the LA area. Like it's like we are like the smallest church around. And so I'm qualifying this statement because I want to let people know that I think the majority of pastors are doing a wonderful job, and they're doing a very hard job very wonderfully. But I think we're also, a lot of the churches in our neighborhoods aren't teaching well. And I think for a number of reasons. So I think that I think there's a whole slew of Christians out there who don't really know why they believe what they say they believe. And like, for example, like if you can I read this too, not just by George Barna, but the Worldview survey that came out of Colorado Christian University. It says the same thing, right? It says that synchronism or syncretism, I get them mixed up. One has to do with time and one has to do with worldview.
I think it's syncretism
I think.
that we're talking about.
What is it?
Syncretism.
Syncretism. Okay, so syncretism has become like the major worldview now, kind of. And what it is like what you're describing. It's a cornucopia. It's like I'm going to pick and choose what I like. But again, that I think we've been taught to treat religion as relative, as subjective. I can make up my own thing, and I'm going to be led by my feelings on this. Like, I don't like the idea that hell exists. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace it with reincarnation, which, by the way, I mean, reincarnation is like, I think, the most awful system ever. This is what leads to caste systems in countries, where you're stuck in a certain caste because of past lives that you can't escape this side of reincarnation.
Yeah, and you actually, like, people want to escape reincarnation who actually buy into that viewpoint, which I think a lot of other people, they're like, oh, that sounds nice,
Yeah.
But it's like actually the goal is to get out of that cycle if you even believe that.
Yeah, and again, I understand. I just want to say, like, I understand the impulse behind syncretism. Like, I understand it, but again, I'm not sure that it takes serious the claims of religion according to these religions. So religions, they don't just like offer like different spiritual lifestyles or different spiritual perspectives. They make contradictory truth claims about God, about salvation, about reality, about morality, about destiny, like these big questions that we started off talking about, right? These big holy cow questions I said, they make contradictory claims about these things, and they can't all be true at the same time. And so there's a disconnect to the Christian, especially if there's a Christian who is they claim Jesus, but then they say they believe in reincarnation, or they believe that all roads lead to Rome, or all roads lead to glory, or I mean, the idea that you have to you pile up your good works on one end of the scale and you pile up your not so good works on the other. I mean, that's Muslim theology, right? And like that's suffocating, honestly. Like that, like, I mean, because like you never have any idea until you stand before God. You don't have any idea of your position before him. It's all in flux. How many good works do you have to do? I mean, this is Mormon theology. I love the Mormons, and I really do have a heart for the Mormons, especially the missionaries who show up at my door. Well, they don't really show up anymore, but they used to. They're young kids most of the time, 18, 19 years old, out on their own for the first time. Many of them are from pretty sheltered environments where they don't have experience out in the real world. So I'd always love to have them in and get them some water and actually talk to them about their worldview. But it also broke my heart because every time they knock on that door, I know why they're there. And I used to ask them this. I'd say, well, why are you here? Well, we want to tell you about Jesus Christ and the plan he has for you, or the good news that through Jesus Christ. I'm like, no, I don't think that's why you're here. I think you're at my door because you have to knock on these doors in order to be saved, because you have to do this for your salvation. So how many doors do you have to knock on? Is it 100, 1,000, 1,001? Where's that threshold? And so like when you start living according to these principles, one, they're impossible to live by. Why? Because it doesn't describe reality. Two, you completely miss out. If you're a Christian, you completely miss out on the grace and satisfaction and love that's found within the Christian system. Your identity as a believer is entailed in that is that God has forgiven you, like, right, as high as the heavens are above the earth, so far has God removed our transgressions from us, right? There is nothing, neither heights nor depths, neither powers nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor any other created thing will be able to separate you from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord, is what the Bible says. So if you, O Lord, the psalmist says, if you, O Lord, were to mark iniquities, O Lord, who could stand? But there's forgiveness in you. Right? So throughout the Old Testament and the New Testament, we're told that God forgives us of all of our sins. So when he looks at us, he doesn't see our good works. There's no scale, right? There's no scale. Put your good stuff here and your bad stuff here. Now, there is judgment, even for the believer, right? But the judgment enters us into glory as a believer, as opposed to judgment entering us into condemnation for the unbeliever, right? So when we stand before God, we are going to be judged according to our works, but that's to give us rewards, not punishment. So God is going to put on display all of our stuff, but it's so that when he welcomes you into the kingdom, you have your rewards according to that. But the kingdom is entered into nonetheless, which I don't know the ins and outs of because I'm not in heaven yet, which I can't wait for. But anyways, I now I forget what we were talking about. Syncretism, right? And so I just it doesn't offer, like, religion just doesn't offer like spiritual styles or preferences. Religions make contradictory claims about very important things, and they can't all be true at the same time.
Yeah. I think it goes back to kind of what we talked about a minute ago. We mentioned Total Truth by Nancy Pearcey, which I'm totally going to link in the show notes because it's an amazing book. But she brought up a point that I hadn't even really thought of before. So often we use the terminology values to describe like our Christian morality. Like Christians will say, we want to advocate for Christian values in the culture. But even that is really like a subjective way of talking about belief. And I think it maybe a lot of Christians and maybe even a lot of pastors have been influenced by that dualism, like that, facts are up here, religion, spirituality is down here. Like this is kind of subjective, even if they don't realize it. Like that's just everywhere in our culture. And so when we talk about values, that really is actually subjective language, because it's like, well, these are the things I value, not this is what's actually true. And if I believe it's true, then I have to live according to that.
Yeah, Liberty, that's a really, really good observation. One of the things I become, and I got this from Megan Ullman, one of my colleagues at Stand to Reason. This is one of the things I've introduced to my abortion presentations, where instead of just diving into kind of the topic itself, I take like 3-4 minutes to talk about the nature of truth And what we just talked about, relativism versus relativism versus objective truth, right? So subjective versus objective. And the reason why is because oftentimes when we make these truth claims that are objective in nature, we make them sound like they're relative or subjective, and and it gets us into trouble. Because when I say abortion is wrong, it's not I think abortion is wrong. It's I think abortion is wrong. It is an actual wrong because it's an objective nature outside of ourselves, and it violates that objective nature, you know. And notice what happens is when we relativize truth, and especially these big moral truths and religious truths, I think that this is a big deal. If you start listening to the way people speak, my family, they're thoroughly relativistic. Unless it comes to Christianity, because then, of course, Christianity is objectively bad, you know. But everything else is on the table, you know. I'm just like, this is just the way that it is, right? Truth is relative unless you're pro life. It's just insane, but it's it's the way that it is. And the reason why I think people get so heated in these conversations is because the truth claims become very personal to them or us when we make them relative to us. They become kind of a part of us, as opposed to this objective nature that's out here. There is a world that is a certain way, and part of that world, there's fundamental features that are built into it. One of them is morality. So when I say X or Y is wrong or X or Y is morally right, it's not a statement about me. So if you have a problem, and this is as Christians, we can come to understand it this way, I think it can really lower the temperature in the conversations, and we can get further, because I'm not making a personal statement. Neither is the person I'm talking to. We're making statements about objective reality out there. And that also means because because it's not relative, remember before I said relativism is like subjective is like ice cream flavors. It's neither right or wrong, right? So you can't be wrong. But objective truth can be wrong, and I'm open to that. Like, if you want to show me evidence as to why the certain features of reality that I've come to believe is objectively true or wrong, I'm happy to have a conversation, because it's not a threat on me. So ultimately, the person who says, oh, well, you believe in Jesus being God the only way, that's exclusivistic, right? People say that's exclusivistic,
Right.
and being exclusive. Well, one, I mean, this is a sidebar, but they're just, all they're doing is calling you a name, right? They're not actually addressing the claim. So they're just calling you a name, which is an ad hominem. Like, you could point that out, or you could just say, like, you know, well, no, your problem isn't with me. I'm not claiming that Jesus is God. Jesus is claiming that he's God. So your problem is with Jesus, not with me. You know, if we could learn how to process objective truth claims like that, I think it would help us. I think it would help us go further in conversations without getting kind of upset or heated, or even just be able to point it out to people. Hey, listen, I'm not trying to offend you at all. Like, yeah, these aren't my claims, by the way. I've said this to my family before. Like, I wish hell didn't exist. I really do, Liberty. Like, legitimately. Like, I wish hell didn't exist, because my mom, my dad, my brother, my sister, their kids, their spouses, like, none of them are believers. And if Jesus were to come back at 12:01 tonight, it's not going to be good for them. You know, and I wish that universalism was true. But the problem is it's just not. You know, and then so there's certain facets of the Christian worldview that I wish were false, but they're just not. You know, and my point is that we should seek to live according to not what feels good, not what makes us happy, but what is actually true. And when we do that, it's really crazy what happens is things start to click and work, you know?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I think when you start talking to people who hold to a synchronistic worldview, and if you can start pointing certain things out to them, I think that they would start to rethink, hopefully they start to rethink some of their false beliefs, I hope.
Yeah. You know, I'm glad you mentioned the kind of the exclusivity problem that a lot of people have, because it strikes us as being like not fair or not very nice. But again, it's not us saying that. It's not even our preference. It's not saying, well, this is just my bias, but actually being true. And one of the favorite points that somebody made in in a conversation that I had on the Noyes podcast last year was that if there is objective truth, which a lot of young people have a hard time believing in right now, that actually gives a lot of order. And like you said, things start to click, because if it is all relative, and then we have to come up with our own like standards or morality, then that's actually like really confusing. And there's so much anxiety today. And also what culture says is moral or acceptable or whatever, that's constantly changing. So you're like always having to keep up if you want to people please. And so it seems that a lot of people don't recognize that, like, if there is objective reality that's outside of us and all we have to do is like learn what that is and then live our lives accordingly, like that actually brings a lot of peace. Like, it might not always be easy, but there's less anxiety because it's not on us to create our own moral order.
Yeah. And just to just kind of add to that is, it's impossible to escape objective morality. Like even the relativist is making objective statements. So you know, the gentleman we've been talking about in his kind of all roads lead to God, you know, this mystery, those statements he is making are themselves objective, because he means that his belief is right and my belief is false. So even the relativist or the moral pluralist, I mean the religious pluralist, right, which is just when you apply relativism to religion, you get you get religious pluralism. So even the religious pluralist is making objective claims and claiming one way. You know, they're saying all religions lead to God. That's just as much of an objective statement as saying Jesus is the only way to God. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. So when the moral relativist, the relativist, I keep wanting to go to morals. When the relativist brings these things up, it's a good opportunity for us as we become more educated and more understanding of how people, listening to how people are speaking. We know that okay, well, I'm listening for objective statements versus subjective, and I'm listening for people to try to place those objective statements down into the subjective category. You can point that out to them. Mm-hmm. You know, and so next time somebody says, "Oh, well, that's relative," you can say, "Well, is your statement relative?" Because, the truth is relative. Okay, there is no truth. Well, is it true that there is no truth? Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? You see it right away, these things start to collapse in on themselves. Yeah. If somebody wants to tell me I'm wrong about a belief, they have to appeal in an objective fashion. Mm-hmm. You know, no, all religions lead to God. Well, do you think it's true? Objectively, like really true that all religions lead to God? Yes. Well, that's an objective truth claim. Mm-hmm. And we know that because it flies in the face of every other religion. Like every religion thinks that they're right, including the Universalist. So they're making the same objective claims that they're trying to tell you you're wrong for making. I hope that makes sense. I'm not sure if it does.
Yeah, no, it really does. And just to kind of bring this back to the dualism that we've mentioned a few times, and then I have one more question to ask you. I think people would accept that there is objective truth when it comes to science. Like gravity, that's not relative. You know, if you jump off a building, you will fall. And and this is a whole separate conversation, which we've talked about on the Noyes podcast before. There are scientific theories that aren't proven, like gravity's proven, evolutionary theory is not proven. But there are scientific objective truths that most people would accept, that, okay, like you're trying to argue with facts here. Like this is just the way it is. And I think what people need to understand, and for Christians too, to like rest in this, is that, well, God created the universe. And so again, we tend to separate like scientific fact, and then the other stuff is kind of like a mystery, like we don't know. It's that spiritual side. But in actuality, like it's all the same. It's all part of the same truth. And there is one objective truth. It applies to science. It applies to religion and spirituality as well. Like God didn't make two universes, like the natural world and the spiritual world, and like they each have their own laws. Like,
yeah,
You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes sense. I probably didn't say that very good.
No, I completely get what you're saying. There's one reality, right? There's the reality that God exists, or there's the reality that God doesn't exist, and they don't exist at the same time. God doesn't exist for you, Liberty, and not for me, John. It doesn't work like that. Either God exists or he doesn't, and he rules and reigns over the universe. Now, I will say that there's depending on the type of claim you're making, you're gonna use different types of methodologies and evidence to figure out if those claims are true. Like, so for example, like scientific claims. Science is a fantastic epistemological tool, right? It's a tool that we use to discern what's true about the world around us in the physical realm. But science doesn't tell us, for example, what ought to be, right? And historically speaking, and we're actually starting to approach some of this stuff with the advent of AI and everything. Like, scientists, the saying is that historically scientists make terrible ethicists, right? Like, so science can tell you what is, but not what ought to be. Now, when you start looking at ought, you got to like the oughtness, like morality and things like this, you got to start turning to things like philosophy, which is another epistemological tool, and theology, another epistemological tool to tell us to ascertain certain truths about the world around us. So depending on what kind of claim we're making, we're going to avail ourselves to certain tools, which is really cool, because the way that I look at it, and coming from naturalism, I always thought as a naturalist, as an atheist, I was the one with the open mind, other than you closed-minded Christians. But in reality, I actually think Christianity is the better system, because it avails us to so many more the types of evidence and so many more ways to ascertain truth, right? On naturalism, all I can avail myself to is what's in the physical world, right? Because the universe is purely physical, right? So that means I can't explain, for example, creation. Not according to the current scientific model, which is Big Bang like cosmology, right? Because the Big Bang necessitates a Big Banger. Like, there are certain qualities. If everything came from nothing, which is what scientists believe, if everything came from nothing, like how does atheism or naturalism explain that? Because all you start with is nothing, and nothing comes from nothing.
Yeah.
So but then Christian theism gives us a whole another set of tools, right? Because we don't start with nothing. We have more than nothing. We have an uncreated creator, and all of a sudden you start opening yourself. So actually Christianity is, I think, a better system of belief. It's more open to look at the world around us and ascertain truth, morality. If atheism is true, if naturalism is true, there is no objective right and wrong. But that's not the reality that we live in. That's not the reality that we observe. That's not the reality that we converse in and travel in our day, like every single day. It's not the one that we interact with, right? It seems that there is an objective system of right and wrong, and at a very fundamental level. And so atheism and naturalism can't give us good reasons, or can't explain why reality is this way. Existence of consciousness. I mean, these things can't be explained. An immaterial aspect of every human being. Well, if naturalism is true, there is no immaterial aspect.
Yeah.
So what do you do with consciousness? Even people like Alex O'Connor, who is like probably the world's most famous atheist today. I really like him. He seems like, I don't know. I'd like to talk to Alex O'Connor offline, like go out to dinner with him or something, But even he says consciousness is a huge problem for him. He would say, I think he's an agnostic leaning atheist. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, anyways, I don't know how I got there, but
well, there's a lot of stuff naturalism doesn't explain. And again, if we're in the business of looking for objective truth, then that objective truth is going to apply to all aspects of reality, not just the natural world. And I think a lot of people intuitively know that there is more than just what we can physically see and feel.
yeah,
And for Christians, it's like, well, that is part of reality. Again, what is ultimately true. It's not up to us to come up with the explanations or the systems. We just have to acknowledge the truth that God has given us. So, may I ask you one more question? Do you have time?
yeah. No, I've got plenty of time. I've got,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I wanted to bring it back I know we talked about, we started off the conversation talking about Mr. James Talarico, and he's a Texan, I'm a Texan. Like you said, I'd like to talk to him offline because, there's a lot of interesting things politically and stuff and ideas that I don't necessarily agree, but seemed like it'd be a good conversation. So again, not trying to dunk on him here, but since we were talking about, okay, the exclusivity of Christianity, and we talked about God, like, okay, if everything came from nothing, who started that? Like who did the Big Bang, right? And so this all gets into one of the things that he said that I thought was so interesting. He says the genius of Christianity, the miracle of Christianity, is not the claim that Jesus is God. It's that God is Jesus. So this idea that ultimate reality, the cosmos, however you want to define God, looks like this humble, compassionate rabbi in the first century. And again, that's something that sounds really nice. And even for a lot of Christians, maybe like, okay, but is there a subtle like nuance there that we have to be able to recognize and say, no, it actually is that Jesus is God? I don't know. It seems like there's something missing in that statement.
Yeah. Well, I think what it is he's, and like I said, I haven't seen the interview, so I don't know 100%. But what it sounds to me like is he's highlighting the humanity of Jesus at the expense of the deity of Jesus, and he's also forgetting. Oh my gosh, sorry, I just like realized something. Like he's completely forgetting. Yes, you know what, Jesus was meek and mild in certain instances. He was very welcoming in certain instances. He spent a lot of time with sinners. He was very compassionate. We get this, but he also fashioned a whip out of cords and cleared the temple.
Mm-hmm.
He also, this is the man who said to the religious establishment of his day, woe to you, whitewashed tombs. But more than any of that, this is also, so it's interesting. When Jesus was here the first time, everybody was looking for a warrior king, right? To come and overthrow the Roman government. That's what the Jewish establishment was teaching and thought. And they got, this Jesus that Mr. Talarico is appointing us to. But what we see, what's interesting is that when Jesus comes back again, we're not going to get Jesus meek and mild. We're going to get the Lion from the tribe of Judah, and Jesus is coming back drenched in blood with truth tattooed on his thigh. And he's here to do business, and I think that sometimes we forget that same Jesus that cured the lepers out of compassion and gave sight to the blind and caused the lame to walk and all these very compassionate things, and they were, is also the judge of the universe. And he's not, he's an all-seeing, all-just, holy judge. That's why the Bible says that it's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. And these things aren't popular to say right now, but they're true, right? You're not going to get Jesus meek and mild. Jesus is coming back and he's doing business, and it's not going to be pretty for a lot of people. So I think that Mr. Talarico is forgetting that part. I think he's highlighting the compassion and humanity of Jesus, but not evenly. And yes, that's true of him, but there's also another component of him. Read Revelation. Jesus is our judge, and it's not going to go well for a lot of people. And so that's how I think I'd respond to him. How's that sound to you, Liberty?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I will say, in fairness to Talarico, he mentions the clearing out of the temple. And so I think for a lot of people that I think maybe are justifiably upset with like the American church. And again, people here in America, we tend to make everything about America and forget that like Christianity is a global religion. It like started 2,000 years ago. Like we're looking back to the beginning of the universe here. It's not all about America, but they see what they view as hypocrisy or injustice, and then they like that story of Jesus clearing out the temple. But what I think about is, okay, but if he was just a figure that challenged religious authority, or he challenges, the things that you don't like, that doesn't really have that much power if he's not God of the universe, like if he's not the one that is in charge of truth and reality. Like, what right does Jesus have to challenge those things if he's not actually God? And so I think like the kind of the more progressive Christianity that likes Jesus in the temple when it's, when he's clearing out the people that they don't like, it is also, but then they want to say truth is relative or morality is relative in these other areas. I think there's a disconnect there that maybe they're not seeing, where, yeah, it's like, well, he can't do those things, if he's not God, then it doesn't make sense. But that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, you can't remove, that's what I mean is like, you can't focus on the humanity of Jesus at the expense of his deity. The only reason why we're talking about Jesus, the only reason that we know that he cleared the temple is because he was raised, right? If Jesus was not raised, he would have just been one false prophet among many. Jesus wasn't the only like person claiming at that time claiming to be God, by the way. This wasn't like a novel idea. I mean, there are other false prophets throughout history, but the thing is they're all dead and buried. Jesus isn't. Jesus is alive today, and that's what separates him. And that was his like final stamp of approval when he ascended into heaven, after his resurrection. Now Jesus is alive, waiting for his next return, his final return. And so I think we can't ever lose sight of that. Jesus is who he says he is. So you can like Jesus in the temple for whatever reason, but you can't ever escape the fact that he's that same Jesus who cleared the temple that you like because he's speaking against the religious establishment is also the one that says that says that he's the only way. That I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. Right? He's the one that says if you preclude children, if you make it an obstacle for children to come to him, you'd be better off to have a millstone tied around your neck. So I asked the pro-choice Christian, how does that sound? Jesus also said some very heavy. It's Jesus who said that if you've lusted after a woman, you've already committed adultery. It's Jesus who says that if you've had hatred in your heart, you've already committed murder. It's Jesus who said to prevent yourself from stop sinning, you should gouge out your eye, right? I mean, Jesus took, it's funny because what we think is that Jesus came and he kind of lessened or softened things for us. But no, in fact, Jesus heightened the law, right? Jesus, like we always say, like, Jesus came to teach love and compassion, and he did. But those things, love is the law. Like he came to elevate the law of Moses. Why? Well, because the law is our tutor. So when we study Jesus, a number of things should happen. One thing is our humanity should come out, and our humanity as a fallen, broken person should come out. And that means our need for a savior should come out. When I look at Jesus, I see many, many things. I see my Lord and my Savior. I see a beautiful thing that's happened, but I see a fearful man. Like not him being fearful. I'm afraid of Jesus, because I think he's the king of the universe, and he sees everything, and I think maybe that's part of, maybe now that I'm saying this stuff, maybe this is part of the reason why people want to soften it, because they know inside, right? They're suppressing the truth and unrighteousness sometimes, right? They know that they're going to stand before this God guilty. And instead of addressing that guilt in their own life by responding and recognizing Jesus for who he is, what they do is they seek to try to change Jesus. But it comes back to truth. Jesus won't be changed, will be changed. Jesus is the only person who ever lived that doesn't need to be changed. We need to be changed, and that's why he's the only way. That's why he's the exclusive savior, because he's the only person that ever lived that's capable of solving the problem. And the problem is sin and death, both of which he overcame, So I think people need to take it. You need to take the claims of Jesus seriously, and don't take my word, John Noyes' word for it. Take Jesus's words for it. Go through the Gospels and then pull out his claims and see who he says he is, and see what he says what he is about himself. And then render the opinion. I think it would change what you think of Jesus. It would affirm certain things too.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, John, this has been a super great conversation. I've enjoyed it, and I think I know it has been so helpful to think through these things that we often hear in culture. So before I let you go, any resources or things that you'd like to point people to?
Oh, in light of our conversation, for sure, Nancy Pearcey, Francis Schaeffer, anything by Schaeffer, but How Then Shall We Live is kind of his seminal work. It's phenomenal. It deals with this type of stuff. He was a prophet. I don't mean that like telling the future. I just mean he saw into the future and was telling what was going to happen in the 80s, and he died in the early 80s. But he saw where we were going to be at as a culture. There's a great book out there called Truth Is Not Ice Cream. And I can't remember who wrote it. I want to say it's Paul Copan, but I don't know if it is. But Truth Is Not Ice Cream is a great book to kind of introduce yourself to these types of concepts. And I want to encourage people that as they people who are listening to your podcast are probably attuned to this already. So I'm not trying to be belittling, but as you start to listen to people speak and actually listen to how they're making the claims that they're making, things get really, really interesting. Because people who claim to be relativists, they betray themselves, because you can't live in the world as a relativist. Eventually, objective claims about religion and worldview come out. So all we need to do is listen. Also, str.org, our website, has a ton of stuff on this, and it's all free. So if you don't want to have to purchase a book, just go to str.org. There's a free, fairly short, what we call a course. It's STR University, maybe 5 or 6 course videos. That's all free. And each video's less than 10 minutes. And I know that there's one on Truth Is Not Ice Cream. Nice. I think Tim Barnett, one of my colleagues, Mr. B, teaches that. So those are some decent resources for you.
Awesome. Well, we will link those in the show notes. And again, John, thanks for being on the podcast today.
Thank you.